All right. So today's presenter is Diane Hamilton, who's also an award-winning mediator, author, and Zen mediation teacher. She began working with Ken Wilber in 2004 and continues to apply integral theory to her work in mediation and meditation. She is the author of 4 books. The most recent is Waking Up and Growing Up, Spiritual Cross-Training for an Evolving World. I am honored to introduce you, Diane. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Steve, very much for inviting me. And I'm so happy to see all my old friends on the call. My sensation right now is entering into a space of friendship, which is delightful and relieving. And we're living in interesting and somewhat challenging times, depending on your perspective. But to be among friends is always a privilege and a pleasure. So thank you for being here, everyone. What is important to me when I think about just my intention for coming and presenting and sharing with you and inviting conversation and inquiry together is just that it's worth your time. And so I really want you to feel free at any moment to inquire, to challenge, to just participate in a way that feels good and natural to you. I have a little bit of a couple of inquiries that I want to bring forward. But before I do that, I think I would like to give some of you a little bit of the background of my journey and how I encountered Ken and why I still come to Boulder and still have dinner and drinks with Jeff and Steve and others at times. So I grew up in Utah, and I grew up in the West Desert of Utah in a very powerful and beautiful natural environment. I grew up riding horses. I was a rodeo queen in my teen years. And so the natural world was in a certain way, I think I don't know, I was so at home in the natural world that I wouldn't even know to comment on it in a certain way. Like it was so much a part of my life. And when and my life was, other than the way in which being human challenges us and creates certain kinds of pain and difficulty, my life was very normal, just growing up in a small town. But when I was 17, 7 of my friends died between February 13th and June, and 4 of them were killed in a light plane. One of my friends had just gotten his pilot's license. He was only 18 years old. And the other 3 people on the plane were 17. They were my age. And then another friend was murdered, believe it or not. Another friend committed suicide. And then I had a friend die on the night of graduation that year in an automobile accident. So I went from living a, very American West life, to suddenly being confronted by what we call in Zen training, the great matter of life and death. And as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, what does it mean to be human, given the fact that we die? And so I was extremely, in a certain way, you could say, destabilized by those experiences. Certainly questions about what had meaning and life and death were really profound for me. And I grew up in a Mormon LDS community. But it was very conformist and very traditional in the way that it taught Christianity, and I felt a little like I didn't quite belong to that culture very well. My parents were somewhat free thinkers, and so when I came to college the following year after these losses, I was in a very deep existential inquiry. And I did what a lot of us do. I don't know how many people here, just by show of hands, it might be fun to see. How many of you have studied philosophy? Can I just, I knew it. You thinkers, you. So, I went down the philosophical road to try to address the questions that I had about life and death. And it was interesting because there's one great Zen master who says that until we close the gap between the questions in our life, and sometimes that gap is filled with lots of ideas and lots of inquiries and lots of thoughts, but until we become one with our life and with our questions, that existential itch doesn't get scratched. And for me, that was really the case, in the sense that philosophy just didn't quite relieve the questions. It seemed to generate more questions. And so in my early 20s, when I first encountered the writings of Trungpa Rinpoche and I started to meditate, that I started to have that experience of my life, my mind, my heart, and my questions becoming one thing. And I felt the relief and the peace of that. And I became, basically a very committed Buddhist practitioner, probably when I was around 22 years old. And like Jeff Salzman, rather than going to graduate school, I went to graduate school in literature for a year or so, but then I really decided that I was interested in studying the Buddhist tradition. So I went to Naropa and got a master's degree and moved back to Salt Lake City when I was a little bit older. And then I started to practice Zen. And right as I had really deepened into Zen practices, when I was introduced to Ken Wilber's work. And that was a very generative, it was almost like, because I had settled into this more experiential sense of who I was and allowed my mind to rest, that when I met Ken, it's like I had this stability in order to re-engage the questions in a way from a different place, from a place of a kind of a existential calm rather than existential anxiety. It's like having so much existential anxiety, the questions made me more anxious. And once I had a practice and knew how to calm myself, if you will, and live from a place that was not so threatened, then suddenly those questions could come back and have a lot of life. And so meeting Ken really changed my life. And one of the things that Ken did is he made powerful distinctions that he also invited us to consider. So, for example, the way that we talk about enlightenment in the Buddhist tradition and what it means to awaken, if you will, is different than what we call enlightenment in the Western tradition. And that's a very compelling idea. And it's the first time that I encountered it, that enlightenment in the East is an awakening of the interiors and a liberation of one's mind and one's heart. And enlightenment in the West is a liberation of the social and secular field. And so one is an internal process and one is an external process that involves how it is we interact with each other. And that together, those two notions of liberation are kind of a complete vision of what liberation really is. And you can say the same thing about unity. The Buddhist tradition has a very profound and offers a very profound experience of unity. In fact, unity is probably the most essential characteristic of what we call the enlightened mind. I mean, liberation, unity. And on the one hand, we have e pluribus unum and this real understanding of the importance in the states of unity. And at the same time, this incredible, maybe a little bit later development of individuality. And in Zen, we say everything the same, everything different. And the Zen tradition has really taught me so much about the relationship of sameness and difference. And then when I turn and look at the political world and look at the relationship of how we build our understanding, our commonality, and our sameness, and I would offer that as of late, I feel that that's been sorely neglected in the public discourse, and that we're very focused on our differences, and particularly in particular camps since the internet came about. So us and them has become a very profound distinction that we don't work with very well at all. And then another thing that we could think about is why equanimity is such an important value in the Buddhist tradition. And in our American lexicon, the word equality has so much, equal, there's a phrase, I think from the Christian tradition, Steve, equal in the eyes of God, right? So so that inquiry about these two different notions of enlightenment has been a very powerful one for me, and one that I've been thinking about a lot. And the other distinction that Ken made that I thought was very helpful for me, and it also changed the way I practice, is he made a distinction between growing up and waking up, in the sense that to become enlightened or become awakened, to discover our essential nature or our identity beyond the local self, if you will, is not the same as maturing. It's not the same thing. And we make a mistake sometimes to conflate those two things. We think that to awaken automatically means that we're going to be emotionally mature. It automatically means that we're going to be ethically developed. It automatically means that we're going to have an intuition towards fairness and towards justice. But none of those things are actually true. And Ken really is the person that helped me to understand that a truly robust spiritual practice needs awakening and it needs maturation. And lately, I've been challenging people that I've been working with to think for a moment, based on your idea of what enlightenment is. Would you rather be stranded on a desert island with someone who is enlightened or someone who is mature? I really enjoy that. I enjoy that, and it's been very interesting. I did an interview on the Sam Harris podcast, his Waking Up podcast. And then they invited me to say some things into the community. So I posted that in their community forum, which is like an internal Facebook. And it was just really interesting to hear all the way, look at enlightened immaturity. Interesting, yeah. Or unenlightened maturity. And that's a really, really juicy thing to consider. So Ken, in a certain way, gave me permission to think about and to ask some questions that within the very profound and deep Buddhist tradition, I was able to start asking questions that for a girl from the American West that I should want to be able to ask. So the title of my new book is called Waking Up and Growing Up, and I would say that what I've been thinking about lately is standing up. Because what does it mean to stand up in the political world? What does it mean to take a position, particularly in light of awakening, in light of maturation? How does one take a position? How does one stand up and take a position when the whole question of growing up is really on the table? Like if you have a developmental view that we actually grow and change through very specific stages, what does standing up look like at Red? What does standing up look like? Or what does it look like at Raw Power? What does it look like as a modernist? What does it look like as a postmodernist or an integralist? So those are the questions that I've been engaging. And maybe finally what I would say is that the whole question of identity is also something that I've been considering very deeply, because the Buddhist tradition, as you know, in a certain way, what we mean by liberation is literally freedom from identity. There's a beautiful poem by a Persian poet named Hafez. Many of you probably know his work. He lived, I think, I can never remember if he was 100 years before Rumi or after. Does anybody know? I think he was 100 years before Rumi. He says that I've learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Muslim, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or a Jew. He says, the truth has revealed so much of itself that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even pure soul. Love has befriended me so completely. It is turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. Which is a vision of complete liberation. But for the times we're in right now, I've been thinking very much again about this American identity. And what does it mean to actually re-embrace an American identity? What kind of American values are... Maybe I can just say one more thing, that in that inquiry of owning the American identity, even at the same time seeing it as not ultimate, not absolute. Of course not. It's not ultimate. It's not absolute. but that one of my frustrations when I listen to discourses about America and what America is that I think that there's a conflation in the discourse that doesn't get properly elucidated. And I think Ken can be helpful with this as well. And that is that we can talk about the reality of America, which is very complex. I mean, there's certain generalized things that we can say about the reality of being an American. But what the aspiration of America is, what those original values were, modernist mostly values, post Enlightenment values that were at the core of how our political system was established. And then we can also talk about what the shadow of America is. Where is it that we failed in those values? Where is it that we're not able to realize the kind of equality, for example, the fairness, the equal opportunity, all those kinds of values that we haven't been able to realize those, what the impacts of wealth, of greed, of capital, of being prosperous, what is the shadow of our prosperity. So, and when I listen to the discourse about what America is, I feel that the distinction is not made between the aspiration and the vision, the shadow and the places that are unilluminated, and then the day-to-day reality of what it means to be a person who was enculturated in this way of being. So that's a kind of a long list of things that have been on my mind when I'm thinking about coming to this evening and sharing with you. So I thought maybe that we could inquire into the first of those, and maybe we could do this in small groups if you're willing. But I think before we do that, I would like to use a process that my teacher uses. And I'd like to use the big mind process because I'd like to give you a little bit of an experience of your own awakened state or your own liberated state. Does that sound like something that interests you? Is just to taste that before we go into talking? Great.
Sure.
Thanks, Ben, Brad. Thanks, you guys. Yeah.
Question, Diane,
Yeah.
would it be helpful? Right now I have you pinned. Would it be helpful to unpin you so we all see each other for this process?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it'd be great for you to be able to see each other.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so this is it's a little, we call it a skillful means or a upaya. And in the tradition of Buddhism, a very powerful distinction is made between teachings that point to our ultimate nature and teachings that help us be better human beings. We call those upayas or provisional teachings. But this one can be used for both. And so I would like to invite you. I'm going to invite you first to identify as the self, and I'm going to ask you to put some things into the chat. And then I'm going to ask you to identify with a different part of yourself, and we'll explore that for a moment, okay? So, as the self, what I would invite you to put into the chat is anything that I've talked about in just 2 or 3 words that caught your attention and that maybe brought some energy into your system. So if you can just in 2 or 3 words, it could be the shadow of prosperity. I saw that caught somebody's eye. Or it could be, enlightenment in the East, enlightenment in the West. So whatever it is as the self that you found created some energy or some interest, if you wouldn't mind just putting that in the chat, and I'm just going to review those a little bit and see what's interesting you right now. So can everybody share into the chat? Is that okay? Great. So waking up, growing up, showing up, very good. Standing up in compassion. Maturity versus enlightenment in the Eastern tradition. Standing up, excellent. What do you mean is the self? Great question, Brian. What are the other options? I would say just to enjoy whatever you want to as a self. You know, if you have the sense that that's optional, just make a choice for the enjoying self. Traditional, postmodern, meaning making around self. Ben, yes. Wilbur on AI. Maturity beyond enlightenment, living maturely and being enlightened, great. East, West, talking about Ken, unity and distinction, great. The Hafez quote, the cultural shadow side, what are we standing for? What are we bowing down to? You as the rodeo queen. Can I tell you, I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote about that, is that once when I was practicing in Europe in the company of a French Zen teacher, and he's asked me if I was a horsewoman. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, I can tell because people who sit on a cushion, if you've had experience with horses, the way that you occupy your seat and the way that you have the experience of the uprightness of your own spine, it just really communicates. So I felt very good about that. And also, when I came to Naropa, the article that Trungpa Rinpoche wrote that caught my attention was Taming the Horse, Riding the Mind. And I was like, I'm in. It's really beautiful. Okay, so, all right, so as the self, why don't you as the self, and again, I'm talking about your localized self, however you choose to inhabit that, what are you aware of in this moment? And how is this moment maybe a little bit different than reflecting on what interested you about the opening of my presentation? And now I'm going to invite you to identify with a different part of yourself. And I am going to invite you to identify as the liberated mind. So just identify as the liberated mind, and I'm going to invite you to ask yourself some questions. So as the liberated mind, what are you aware of in this moment? And you can raise your hands and I'll call on you because I just want to experience you as inherent liberation. So do you like to, shall I call on you or do you want to raise your hand with the raise hand function?
Try to use the raise hand button if you can.
Great.
A lot of people on the call.
Yeah, so just allow yourself to feel yourself not as a self, but as the liberated mind. What do you notice? John.
I see a group of souls discussing the path forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as the liberated mind, John, I notice, where would you say your attention is? Is it in the past or the future? Is it in the here and now? Where do you notice it?
The liberated mind is beyond time.
It's beyond time. And can it also occupy time?
If it so chooses, yes.
Yeah, very good.
Like its past lives and its future lives.
Yes, that's right. But what I noticed is in right here, right now, these people on the call are in an inquiry about the future, and yet the attention is very much in the here and now. So let's just pay attention to that for a moment. So Brian, as the liberated mind, can you tell me what you're aware of right now?
I'm aware of us coming together.
Mm-hmm.
We're searching for answers. We're searching for ways forward.
Mm-hmm.
I feel identity with that. I feel that is part of myself, that I am part of that greater self.
Yeah, beautiful.
Of a searching.
Mm-hmm. And an inquiry and a question. Very
Yes.
good. Deborah, how about you as the liberated mind? What do you notice?
I'm noticing my inner experience, what's happening in my mind and how I'm feeling, and that it just kind of comes and goes.
Right. So there's a lot of fluidity. There's a certain amount of things can arise and things can fall away. Can you find as, and I'm going to also use the word open. Why don't I also use the word as the open mind? Can you find a limit in the mind?
Not in that state of mind.
Yeah, exactly. Can Deborah find limits?
Oh yeah. They find her.
Yeah, they're hunting her down every moment. All right, beautiful. All right, so we should just notice that the identity with the self, that there are certain kinds of limits and preoccupations, and that the open mind or the liberated mind, there's just much more space. much more possibility and expansiveness. Very good. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate this. Ellen, as the liberated mind, what would you say? What do you notice?
I noticed the we space where there's me and there's we, and we're energetically connected, but still cells.
So in a certain way, Ellen, what I'm hearing is what I was pointing to earlier, which is I said I think the Zen tradition is particularly skillful in recognizing how we are the same and the kind of infinity in a way of our sameness, and how radically particular we also are. That every one of us in an almost a same infinite amount of difference. When you focus on difference, it's endless, right? And when you focus on the sameness, it's also just, there's a boundlessness to our sameness. Thank you.
Like an energetic infinity symbol.
Yeah, very good. I like that. Very good. So Brad, how about you? Let's just call you liberation. As liberation.
Divine presence that's all pervading, boundless. And it really feels like the liberated heart as much as the mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In Chinese, the word Xin is heart mind. It's heart mind. So I'm glad you brought that up. And sometimes spirit. So Ben is saying, as liberation, there's an absolute absence of fear, which is really important. Also, he's saying that noticing fewer thoughts and more presence. So a little less preoccupation with the content of the mind and a little bit more quality of being available to, presence itself, awareness itself, and just the suchness of this moment, including the we space. And I'm noticing very much how the group has so much reality to everyone. Even given the fact that we're online, it's quite remarkable. Yeah, Brian, as liberation or as the liberated heart mind, what do you notice?
I'm puzzled by your suggestion that I have more than one self. What are you talking about?
When you are let's see. Can I get a spotlight maybe for a minute so I can work here a little bit? Can we be spotlighted, Rigel, the two of us?
Let me see. I know how to pin you. I don't know how to
spotlight. That's fine. I just don't know where the person was that I was working with. I don't know where.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. Brian.
Oh, okay. If I put my hand back up, maybe that will help.
I've got you. Spotlight for everyone. Here we go. Okay.
Okay.
Spotlight.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. So Brian, this question, what do you mean by different selves? So I'm going to keep it just relatively simple. So, are you married?
I
am. Are you a father or are you a grandfather? So would you say that your identity as a husband differs a little bit from your identity as a father?
No.
They're the same.
Well, as far as myself goes, I am it. I'm one self. Here it is.
Would you say...
You're talking about multiple selves, and I don't... Please explain that. I don't know what you mean.
Okay, I hear you. And I'd rather not explain it because that's not going to work. I would rather just point to what I'm talking about. And I don't think, again, I'm not talking about an absolute self. What I'm talking about is the way in which identity shapes our perceptions. So if I identify as a friend, certain kinds of qualities come forward in me. Right? If I identify someone as an enemy, other qualities come forward in me. If I identify myself as a teacher, things come forward. If I'm a student,
these roles?
Yeah, they could be roles, but again, they're self-identities, and I'm really talking about what comes down to us in the the kind of the Western psychological tradition through Freud, Jung, and down to all these part theory people, like voice dialogue, Fritz Perls, that sometimes the part of me that's really lazy needs to have a conversation with the part of me that's ambitious, right?
Well, can I proceed as though we're talking about roles and different roles I play?
Absolutely.
I can grasp
Absolutely.
that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, good. So let me ask you a question before you go. Let's talk about, does the word liberation have meaning to you? Can you feel like you have a part of you that has an enlightened role or a liberated role, you could say?
Yes, but there's not a part that doesn't.
Well, I think that's probably true. But if you put your attention, because a lot of times it has to do with where we're putting our attention, right? So, of course, the enlightened dimension of who we are is always present, but am I always identified with it? No. Are you always identified with it?
Maybe I don't do this thing you call identifying.
Maybe.
I'm not familiar with that.
I want to hear about the part of you. I want to speak okay, let me do this. Can I speak? Well, maybe not. So I'm noticing that I have a little bit of an agenda for you to see what I'm trying to do. And I think you have seen it and you're comfortable with roles. So I think we should leave it at that. I'm not going to keep with my agenda.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Thanks, Brian. Okay, good. All right. So the reason that I want to speak to this, to the part of us that is liberated, the role of liberation, is because when we contemplate the word liberty from an American point of view, it's really helpful to have an internal sensation of what that is. Right? Well, as soon as things are outside of us, if we don't have an internal reference point, then it becomes a little bit of there's a gap. Remember when I said, the great Zen master said, until we can close the gap, there's suffering. So if I anticipate liberty here, but I can't feel it here, that's a problem. Because it tends to be more of an idea that I have than an actual experience. So if I have the experience of liberation, then I can look at it more in my world and see where it's showing up and where it isn't. Does that make sense, guys? Steve, are you with me? I got to see if I have people. I've got you. Okay. Can I see by a show of hands if you're with me? Okay. And maybe I'll take a moment just to have you ask me any questions. Do you have any questions before we go into a small group and do an inquiry? Okay, so here's what I want to invite, is I would like for you in a group of 3 to access the part of you that experiences freedom. One of my students works at the prison, and he was working on this. We've been doing this together, this looking into the American identity. And so with the prisoners at the prison, he invited the liberated quality of mind or heart to come forward. And it was really, really touching within the setting of the prison for people to connect with liberation. Right? So what I'm going to ask you to do in small groups is just to connect to that part of who you are. And if you want to deepen it or discover more about it or explore it more together, please do. But the question that I'm going to pose for you is this value of liberty and of freedom that is so much a part of the American psyche. In what ways have you experienced that quality even today? So, for example, I feel a tremendous amount of freedom in even asking the question of how I should participate in the political agenda, right? Like that I can even ask how to participate. There's an inherent freedom in that. And what I'm interested in is reconnecting to the value of liberty and the value of freedom from an external place, also in relationship to this part of my interior. And so I'm going to invite you to join me in that. Okay. So I'm going to give you about 15 minutes You can do a little bit more of exploring the interior liberation. And then I really want you to affirm the ways in which you've experienced the American value of freedom within the last day or two. Like, where in your life have you really experienced freedom? Does it make sense? All right, great.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to open up the rooms.
So what we're doing here is we're looking at these American values and we're tying them and the Enlightenment in Europe, the Enlightenment in the West, the Enlightenment in the East, and we're kind of bringing these two together. Okay?
All right. Here we go.
Great. You've got good looks on your face. Did you have a good conversation? Great. Awesome. So Steve is going to share in just a minute what he shared with me, because I thought it was really, it was helpful and instructive in terms of what it is I'm trying to open up by way of just, our contemplation together. But he would like me to begin by just being a little bit more clear and descriptive about the liberated state and what that's like. How many of you, by show of hands, feel like you had access to what you would call the liberated state? Great. Yeah, you look good. Jeff, good. Yeah. Okay, so obviously I come from a very particular kind of training, and I've been training in a Buddhist approach to meditation since I was 22. I'm 66 now, so that's I guess I can do the math. 44 years of a lot of sitting practice. So what I would say is, when I identify as freedom, and there's lots of different words that in the tradition we use for this. We can use the word emptiness. We can use the word Buddha nature. We can use the word true nature. We can use the word boundlessness, openness. What I'm aware of is that my attention, I should say, not my mind, but my attention is largely resting in the here and now. And that my attention is rather open, and I'm able to feel with my awareness, if you will, with awareness itself, I'm able to, everything that is arising simply is as it is. One of the major markers of this open state of mind is that the mind that creates for and against, the mind that creates good and bad, the dualism of what I prefer and what I don't prefer, is largely relaxed. Like, even if I have a sensation that's unpleasant, I don't seem quite as reactive as I normally am. And I think it's one of the reasons that meditation has been so important to me, is because I actually am freed from my own ridiculousness. I notice as this quality of openness and that there's both relaxation and heightened attention. So it's a little bit paradoxical to be in this state of mind. I'm aware that there's a vividness to my experience, that when my cognitive mind is thinking and musing and inquiring, that I don't hear the sound of the fan. I don't notice the quality of light falling down from above me. I don't smell very often. And all of a sudden, all my senses are completely awake. So that quality, we use that word wakefulness, there's a wakefulness to this state of mind as well. And one of the things we say is it's very, very difficult to describe this, because there's something ungraspable, very difficult to put into words, unknowable, you could say. poets do maybe the best job, like the Hafez poem where he talks about identity. I can't call myself these things. They're too limiting. So that quality of limitlessness. You know, another quality I think that's really intrinsic to this open state of mind is the sensation that even as things are, there is something fundamentally okay. And now that doesn't mean that we can't respond with compassion. That doesn't mean that we can't act to interfere with injustice. That doesn't mean that we can't try to right certain situations, but it does mean that we're coming from a willingness to see reality as it is. Suchness is what we call it in the Buddhist tradition. So that's what I would offer, Steve. I could keep going.
Oh, no. I mean, I'd love to have you just keep going.
Okay.
It feels liberating
It
to hear
does
you describe it in such terms. But
Okay.
you asked me to say what we talked about when we
Yeah,
had.
I think it would be great if you wouldn't mind. It'd be wonderful.
Sure, of course. Well, first, you asked me if I was okay with this, and I said I think it's genius to attempt to connect, the spiritual with the political through the nexus between liberation and liberty. And you asked me, how that felt, and I talked about some personal experiences of liberation. I would kind of put it in terms of transcendence or spiritual growth. Like it's not a permanent condition of liberation, but it's an ongoing process of like, you're a snake and you're shedding your skin, you're being liberated from your old constraints. That certainly describes spiritual growth as I've experienced it. And in my personal life, framing it in terms of liberation, I can report feeling liberated upon moments of great joy and happiness. Like, that is the concerns of the world just kind of dropped down, when I became a dad, when, I realized that I'd found my true love. When I climb certain mountains, there's this feeling of liberation. And, it's kind of a strange spiritual experience that occurs. In 1994, when I first had an ayahuasca journey, I mean, the next morning, I think liberation was probably the best word to describe that.
The journey or being done with the journey.
No. Well, the experience of having been through the journey and have been transformed by it. So it wasn't a bad experience. It was like,
Okay,
I'm
great.
free from that. No, it was more like I'm free as a result of that.
Okay.
At least, I mean, we always settle back down into our ego because we have to deal with the world, right? But
Right.
but to a degree, you can taste it, then you never go back to the old snake skin, so to
Yeah,
speak, at least
that's right.
when it works, right? So, the example that I used in terms of what came up for me when you talked about look inside and see where this idea of spiritual liberation connects with liberty, I shared the anecdote of how I felt in 2012 when my state, Colorado, was one of two states to not just decriminalize but legalize marijuana. And, look, I'm a philosopher. I'm a type A person. This stuff's helped me throughout my life. I've tried to be moderate and healthful about it, but I have to say that, that it's been a lifelong, sometimes called the philosopher's friend. And I hoped I voted for it. I hoped that it would work. But when it happened,
Yes.
there was something kind of unbelievable about it. And what I realized after the fact was that I felt this sense like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't expect that. That had been, 40 years of worrying and feeling like I was going to be pulled over and arrested, or, people are going to break down my door. Just this sense of the war on drugs being always in the background of my mind. When that finally happened after the fact, I felt this sense of, political liberation that had spiritual qualities to it. So
Wow.
that's just
Wow.
my little share.
So can I go one step further? In terms of just your work and the ideas that you're attempting to get into the world and the way that you're working to, in a certain way, give voice to a certain set of values and a way to see the political process, does the inner state of liberation, does that have bearing on your work in a way?
Absolutely. I mean, the liberation as it's taught, especially in Zen Buddhism, but also Tibetan Buddhism and other great spiritual traditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's been an interest of mine throughout my life, and I wouldn't describe it as my personal path. I'm as I've said in other occasions, I'm more of a panentheist, and that does there's some interesting challenges there, but nevertheless, I've always welcomed the challenge of that to my own limits, the limits of my own beliefs. And so having kind of been a student of that, or at least, as interested in it my entire life, I felt as though that sense of the promise of liberation, just the concept of liberation, the hope is a better way to put it, the hope of liberation, and the idea that liberation is kind of where we're going, where I'm going. That has been something that has been, in various different terminologies. It's something, the sense of satisfaction that I said before regarding being a parent or, finding my true love, that sense of finding my true love, that liberatory quality of that, I've also felt it through my work. When I've had an insight that I feel is valuable, or when I've shared it with people in ways that has helped them, have an aha moment. Those are, I think, highly accurately described as forms of liberation. Although, I don't want to push it too far.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. And I told Steve it was helpful because he did the work of linking in his own mind and his own life the spiritual and the political, and how those two came together in that moment. And he saw the relationship of the legalization of marijuana, suddenly a weight being lifted, and then feeling that same kind of opening in other moments of his life, and realizing that these two things are related. And it's important for us to make that relationship between the inside and the outside, I think. As particularly if we want to go the long haul with our activity.
In fact, you could
yeah, please go ahead.
say the marijuana law would be more liberty than actually liberation, right,
Yes,
Steve?
that's right.
Well, they connected. That's where there was an overlap, right? Between an increase in liberty and a sense of spiritual liberation that I didn't anticipate. It snuck up on me. I felt it after the fact, but it was palpable.
I know the feeling.
You felt it as well, huh? Brad, is there anything you want to share from your experience?
Well, I'll just share what our group talked about. I was with two wonderful, nice ladies. Rights and responsibilities came up as another polar thing that you had pointed out, which I thought also was very beautiful, the difference between liberation and liberty, one being more Eastern oriented and one being more Western oriented. And just like rights are in a whole on are more about the individual agency, whereas the responsibilities are how we interact in communion with other whole-ons. And so in our conversation, we ended up kind of getting our marching orders for June 14th, the anti-King Day protests. So I thought that was fun and inspiring.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Thank you very much.
So the standing up was very useful.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share anything that came up in your experience that somehow was in what's the word? Not revitalizing, but enlivening for you?
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah.
So I'm finding the connection between mastering my own self-constraints and my internal freedom. There's a relationship there. So, for example, I was just saying to the group, I'm writing a book. It takes me about an hour to physically constrain myself and get my bum in a chair. That's a physical...
to wind down to the chair, yeah.
So I'm constraining myself physically. And then I have to constrain myself mentally until I can focus. And once I've done that, I'm completely free. So there's a physical and mental self-constraint. Nobody's constraining me. And I have to master that. And I pop through a hole into a whole new dimension of freedom from where the self-expression just flows. So it's a state of flow, creative flow. That is my place of liberation. And it involves self-constraint. So the two are partnered. Thank you.
Yeah. So the limit is essential to the freedom.
And nobody's telling me to do that.
Yeah.
I constrain myself.
Mm-hmm. And flow has three fundamental qualities also, which correspond in the flow research to how somebody's talking about Ian Gilchrist and the right and left brains. But in the flow state, there's timelessness, there's effortlessness, and the other one is selflessness, which are also...
The identity is very expanded. There's no ego left in that state.
Exactly, right. So that corresponds very much to what we mean by liberation, using the word flow, and a tremendous amount of creativity that comes from that. Beautiful. Well, I want you to feel, if this interests you, another few sets of kind of interior and exterior would be the relationship of unity and diversity, or as Rigel pointed out to me, plurality, unity and plurality, because that's been really, really important in the American experiment. This whole question that we'd be such a vast, highly differentiated culture. We used to call it the melting pot, right? But that's fallen out of favor because I guess we haven't melted very well. But that's the whole point, is that I have a German friend that whenever he comes to the States, what he says is he just marvels at the fact that we have these just remarkably different communities living side by side. You think about the early New York City and Boston and those cities that just had one immigrant community living next to another one, next to another. That quality of pluralism has been so important to our identity. And yet, at the same time, there comes a point, it seems like, in our process where that differentiation starts to feel like it's too much to certain people, and other people, we can't get enough of it, So that question of how do you build sameness at the same time, because my experience as a mediator is that the more that I attend to the unity, the more the differentiation can express itself. And we were having a conversation about how important it is to learn and to become more able to tolerate the sensations of disagreement, relax the sensations of threat, relax the egoic. The ego tends to collapse into one viewpoint and hold open multiple points of view. That is an exercise in diversity. But if you don't have a strong relationship and a strong bond, that becomes almost impossible. In my work, the deeper the bond and the sameness, the more there's the ability to express diversity. So that's something that you could explore. I also brought up this notion of equanimity. I talked to you about that earlier. How is equanimity, this ability to allow whatever arises in your experience at least to have a place? That's not to say that you don't respond, but you allow what is to be. You acknowledge that it's occurred. So therefore, when I'm mediating, I'll hear people say things that I'm like, oh my God, did you really have to say that? Now we've got to find our way out. But if I'm not willing to allow that to be true and I ignore it or try to change it too rapidly, I can't actually work with the energy of the room. I can't work with the unity. So equanimity doesn't have to do with denying what is. It has to do with being willing to allow what is to be there. And it's the same as letting people have a voice, giving everyone a place at the table. That's a really powerful value. And yet we find ourselves now in struggles to really allow for that. So those are contemplations that I would leave you with. And then I think the other one is just really this important distinction that really needs to be made in our discourses around the very highly complex, beautiful, and terrible experience of what it is to be an American, the beautiful experience of what it means to be an American, the aspiration, the values, the vision of America versus the failures, the shadow, the places that need to be looked at. Because my experience is in conversation, those three are all rolled into one. And like when it really became clear to me is when I was watching the inauguration, when Joe Biden was elected, and I was just watching that vision and that aspiration kind of energy. And then I was hearing people complain that it didn't account for all of the problems. And I said, well, that's not its moment. This is the moment to celebrate the vision. It's a different moment to engage the shadow and to do your best to work with those energies and to liberate those energies. But to conflate them is a terrible problem that we have in our conversations and in our public discourse, that we're always rolling all three of those together. And they really do need to be, we need to distinguish and we need to affirm the work that happens in those three different domains. So I just want to leave you with that as well, because I think it's so important. And then this whole question of, can we own our identity, our political identities? Because in some groups, people can't. I find that that a national identity is almost like considered to be toxic for some of the people I work with. Like the idea that you would identify with being from Chicago, or that you would identify with being from America. Like there's something like almost not okay about that. And so I really want to encourage us to kind of look into that and really own it in a fresh and a new way. And that's what I mean by standing up. So do you have any other just questions of me having come to be with you, or any comments that you want to make before we close? Jeff, I want to hear from you. What's on your mind? I'm always interested in what you're thinking.
Well,
yeah, Stephen, thank you. Good, exactly. Very good.
I think, I would just be reported from our group
okay, great.
a bit.
Yeah.
And, I think it's the integral approach is, can you identify with all the voices out there? Can you can you see the LA scene from the perspective of an immigrant, an undocumented immigrant? Can you see it from the perspective of MAGA? Can you see it from the perspective of ICE? Can you see it from the perspective of, somebody who's violent? Mm-hmm. Not that any of that condones it or you have to go there, but can you hold it? And mm-hmm. Can you argue it? Mm-hmm. And, I think that's the sort of the calisthenics of integral, is to argue the points of view, particularly the ones that aren't native to you. Yeah. Don't come naturally, mm-hmm. And do it as well as they can. Mm-hmm.
And can you create a hierarchy of perspective?
Yeah.
When you've taken all of them, then can you rank order them according to your value set? Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And then, but you can, I like what you said at the very beginning. You felt as you entered this group, a sort of a wash of friendship. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of hold the whole thing so that you're friendly to all of it, which does not mean that you're permissive, but you're not so mad.
Or just mad for a minute.
Or just mad for a minute, or you can see your madness instead of be your madness.
Yeah, exactly. It would be the same as the post about, you can be a patriotic flag waving in America, and you also can be highly critical, but it's very not so effective to do it at the same moment.
Not at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. What's the moment? What's needed? What's giving life? What can you take a stand for?
How can you move from one to the other with less friction? Yeah. What's appropriate to this moment, to this person, to this, scene? So
it looks like people are lobbying for your podcast to come back, Jeff.
Yeah, well, I feel that way too, but
but let's take a stand for Jeff's podcast.
I've become a housefrau, I'm afraid.
All right, let's try to get to Deborah and Mary. We just have a few more minutes.
Thank you. Go ahead, Deborah.
I just appreciate this conversation, and what I'm getting from it is the identity as a constraint of freedom. Mm-hmm. And but at the same time, like, as long as you're really attached to that identity, but if you're just aware of it and kind of take it on and off as necessary. It's a different quality.
Yeah, and it relates to what a woman was saying about her writing practice, is that when you make a choice to be limited, that there can be a freedom in that, but it has to do with us being aware of it, Deborah. So I like the fact that you're seeing that.
And then, in our group, we were really getting into this whole interplay between external and internal freedom. But how the internal, you always had that choice to react the way you could, or not. And so the choice is on the inside. So that was just helpful for me just to hear that.
Thank you for coming. It's good to see you, Deborah.
Yeah.
And is there somebody else, Nigel?
Mary.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I can be really fast too. I just wanted to underscore something you said. First of all, thank you, Diane. Beautiful conversation.
Oh, thank you, Mary.
An opportunity to come together. I'm in the LA region, so it's been a rough few days, and I have many people, including in my own family, who are directly impacted in a variety of ways. So I wanted to go back to something you said and just kind of drive it home, because it was so powerful to me, is what you spend the T. I talk a lot about time, effort, energy, and attention. That's all I have. That's all I have. It's my point of personal power. And when I'm in fear, it all fades away quickly, like in an instant. And if I can get back to that through meditation, is what works for me, and I guess a lot of people, surrender into the what isness, and then I can get my time, effort, energy, and attention under my own control, and I can point myself to the emergence that I am taking a stand for. And if I can't do that, I'm no good to that. If I'm in fear and in anger, I'm feeding the other existence.
Yeah,
So,
beautiful. Thank
you
you so much. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, blessings to your family.
All right.
And to everyone in LA. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. This was wonderful. Can we all yes.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you
much.
so much for letting me share what I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane.
And before I make one announcement, I just want to say I have been admiring the artwork behind you.
Oh, thank you.
And what it reminds me of, and maybe it's just like the pixelation on the screen, is kintsugi, that Japanese art where you break a piece of,
with the gold,
and then you repair it using the gold. So the shadows in the water remind me of the gold repair of the kintsugi art. And there's something, kintsugi, that gold is the unifying power that is animated by the cracks. So
what a beautiful image for us to end with. Thank you.
Okay. Next month, we have Carter Phipps presenting on July 9th. So I hope you all will be here for that. And
I can just say, I have an announcement too. The Institute for Cultural Revolution is having our annual summer party. It's going to be on Friday night, July 25th. If you happen to be in the Front Range, save the date, and we'll send more information about it. But I just wanted to put that out there now before we get to, July 12th or whenever the next meeting is.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for showing up.
Thanks, Diane. That was awesome. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. See you next
Real pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, folks.
Thank
Be
you.
cool.
Bye.
One love.